Above her, she heard his door close, not slam, close gently, like a man shutting something in rather than shutting her out. She did not sleep that night either, but this time, when she lay awake listening to the storm, she was no longer entirely certain what she was listening for. The photograph fell out of a book 2 weeks after the storm, and it was that, not any conversation, not any long evening by the fire, that finally cracked the last of the distance between them wide open. Mara had been going through her grandmother's library, box by box, setting aside the volumes worth keeping and the ones worth donating, when a slim paperback of poetry slipped from her hands and hit the floor, spine up, pages fanning open. A photograph slid out from somewhere near the middle and landed face up on the rug. It was her grandmother, younger than Mara had ever known her, though not too young, silver already threading through her dark hair, standing in the garden behind the house, laughing at something outside the frame, and beside her, one arm loose around her waist, unmistakably younger than he was now, but just as unmistakably himself, stood Elias. Mara sat very still on the floor of the study, staring at it. It wasn't the photograph of an employee. It wasn't the photograph of a caretaker standing beside the woman who paid him. The way her grandmother was tucked into his side, the way his hand rested at her waist, like it had done so 1,000 times before. The sheer, unguarded joy on both their faces. It was the photograph of two people who loved each other plainly, completely, without a shred of the caution he had been performing for her since the night she arrived. She was still holding it, when Elias came to the study door, drawn by the crash of the book against the floor. She watched the moment he saw what she was holding, watched every carefully maintained wall in his face come down at once, replaced by something naked and afraid. Mara, don't. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Don't do the thing where you give me half of it. I am so tired of half of it, Elias. Tell me what this is. Tell me what you were to her. The real answer, not the caretaker answer, not the we were something answer. Tell me the truth right now, or I swear I will call the lawyer myself and have you removed from this house by morning. He came in the room slowly, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like a man guarding a secret and more like a man exhausted by the weight of having guarded it so long. I loved her, he said. That's the truth. That's the whole of it, or as much of it as I can give you tonight. Loved her how? Mara's hands were shaking around the photograph. As a friend, as family, because that is not a photograph of friends, Elias, and it is not a photograph of family. And if you tell me one more comfortable lie, I don't think I can stay in this house with you another night. Would it be so terrible? His voice cracked on the question, and it was the crack more than the words that stopped her cold. If I told you I loved her the way a man loves a woman, does that frighten you so much? She was. Mara stopped, swallowed, made herself say it plainly, the way he never quite let himself. She was old enough to be your mother, Elias. More than that. And you're telling me you were what? together for years in this house, while the rest of us thought she was alone. She was never alone. Not after the first year I was here. He said it without apology, and somehow that was worse than if he'd flinched. I know what it looks like from the outside. I know exactly what your family would have said, what they still would say if I confirmed it outright. That's why she never told any of you. Not because she was ashamed, because she knew what you'd make of it before you ever let yourselves understand what it actually was. And what was it? Mara's voice broke on the question. All the careful control she'd been holding for 2 weeks, finally giving out. What was it, Elias? If it wasn't what it looks like. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her on the floor of the study, among the scattered books, and took the photograph gently from her shaking hands, not to take it away, but to hold it where they could both see it. It was the only thing in 11 years that made either of us feel less alone, he said. That's what it was. I'm not going to dress it up as something smaller because it's easier for you to hear. I loved her. She loved me. Whatever your family would have called it, whatever ugly word they'd have reached for first, it was never that. It was two people who found each other in a house full of other people's absence and held on. Mara stared at him, at the raw, unguarded grief in his face, and felt something in her own chest give way. Not the anger she'd been holding onto since the moment she found him at the top of the stairs, but something far more dangerous, something that had been building underneath the anger for 2 weeks without her ever quite letting herself name it. I don't know what to do with this, she whispered. I don't know what to do with any of it. The lease, the photograph, the way she stopped herself. The way you what? Nothing. Mara, his voice had dropped, low and rough, closer than she'd let him get in 2 weeks. Say it. The way I feel when you're in the room, she said, and it came out of her like something torn loose rather than spoken. I hate that I feel it. I hate that it's inappropriate and confusing and probably some kind of grief doing strange things to me that I'll regret in the morning. But I feel it, and I have felt it since the storm, and I think you have too. And I am so tired of both of us pretending otherwise, while you ration out half-truths at me like I can't be trusted with the whole of anything. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The photograph lay between them on the floor. Her grandmother's laughing face, caught forever in a garden that no longer existed the way it had that day. And Mara watched Elias war with himself in real time, watched the exact moment he stopped winning. I have felt it, he said, since the first night, since you stood in that doorway looking at me. Like I was something to be afraid of, and some terrible part of me thought, there she is, finally, and then hated myself for thinking it, because of everything you don't know yet, because of everything that makes this so much worse than you understand. Then tell me. I can't. Not yet. Not like this. but he didn't pull away. If anything, he moved closer, close enough that Mara could see the war still raging behind his eyes, close enough that the space between them had narrowed to almost nothing. Elias, I know what I'm supposed to do right now, he said very quietly. I'm supposed to stand up, put the distance back, remind us both why this is a mistake before it becomes one we can't undo. His hand came up, hesitant, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face with a gentleness that undid her more thoroughly than any declaration could have. I don't seem to be doing that. No, Mara breathed. You don't. What happened next was not careful. It was not the slow, deliberate thing either of them might have chosen if either of them had been thinking clearly. It was 2 weeks of guarded conversation and unspoken longing, breaking all at once. His mouth finding hers with a desperation that startled them both. Her hands fisting in his shirt like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. It was the study floor and the scattered books and a photograph of a dead woman watching from the rug, and neither of them cared. Not in that moment. Not with everything they'd been holding back finally given somewhere to go. It was Elias who broke it first, pulling back with a ragged breath, his forehead resting against hers, both of them shaking. We can't, he said, though his hands hadn't let go of her. Mara, we can't. Not until you know everything. It isn't fair to you otherwise. Then tell me. I'm afraid, he admitted, and it was the first time in 2 weeks she'd heard him say something so plainly, without armor, without careful rationing. I'm afraid that the moment you know the whole truth, this, whatever this is, whatever we just started, ends before it has a chance to be anything at all. And I find I don't want it to end. God help me, Mara. I don't want it to end. Then don't tell me tonight, she said, and hated herself even as she said it. Hated the part of her that would rather have this, whatever fragile, unfinished thing this was, than the truth that might take it away. Tell me tomorrow. Tell me when I'm braver. Just not tonight. He looked at her for a long moment, something like relief and something like grief moving across his face in equal measure. And then he kissed her again, slower this time, like a man memorizing something he already knew he was going to lose. They didn't sleep again that night, but it was for an entirely different reason than the ones that had kept them both awake before. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality to them, as though the house itself had agreed to hold its breath. Mara found herself watching Elias across breakfast with an attention that had nothing to do with suspicion and everything to do with hunger. The particular hunger of someone who has spent 2 weeks starving for a thing without letting herself admit it. He was gentler with her now, in small, unshowy ways. A hand at the small of her back when they passed in the narrow kitchen doorway. A habit of finding reasons to be in whatever room she occupied, as though proximity itself were a kind of vow neither of them had spoken aloud. But the guardedness hadn't vanished entirely. It had only changed shape. You still flinch, Mara said on the second morning, watching him go still over his coffee when she asked lightly what her grandmother had liked to do on ordinary Tuesdays. Every time I ask you something small about her, you still flinch, like I've asked you something dangerous. Old habit. He didn't meet her eyes. 11 years of not being able to answer honestly leaves a mark. It doesn't come off just because. He gestured vaguely at the space between them, at whatever had changed on the study floor. Just because this happened. What if I told you I don't need the whole truth today? Mara said. What if I just asked you for the small things? What she liked, what made her laugh, the ordinary shape of the life you had with her, not the parts you're so afraid will change how I see you. Something in his face eased fractionally, and for the rest of that morning he gave her exactly that. Small things, offered freely for the first time since she'd arrived. Her grandmother had hated the taste of coffee, but loved the ritual of making it, brewing a full pot every morning and drinking exactly 1 cup out of what Elias suspected was pure stubborn nostalgia for a husband dead 30 years, who'd loved the smell of it filling the kitchen. She'd kept a running argument with the gulls that nested on the bathhouse roof, naming them, holding grudges against the ones that stole her tomatoes. She read mysteries almost exclusively, always guessed the ending by the halfway point and pretended every single time to be surprised regardless. It was a good morning. It was, Mara would think later, one of the last good mornings before the shape of everything changed. The kind of morning where the wound of the 11 lost years felt for the length of a pot of coffee neither of them finished, almost survivable. It was that afternoon, going through a box of her grandmother's correspondence she'd been putting off for a week, that Mara found the photograph tucked into the poetry book, and everything after that moved faster than either of them was ready for. In the 3 days between the study floor and the letter, something had shifted between them that neither could quite name. Not quite a relationship, not quite a confession, but something with its own gravity, pulling them into each other's orbit in ways neither seemed able or willing to resist. They stopped pretending the second bedroom upstairs saw much use. They stopped pretending the meals they shared were about practicality. There was a tenderness growing between them that felt, to Mara, dangerous, like falling in love with a man she did not fully understand, and she suspected from the careful way he watched her across every room that he felt the precariousness of it just as keenly. I keep waiting for you to change your mind, she told him the night before the letter came, lying in the dark of his room, with her head against his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. About all of this, about me, I've had 11 years to change my mind about things, he said, low into her hair. I know what staying costs and what leaving costs more. I'm not going anywhere, Mara. Whatever else you learn about me, that part isn't in question. She wanted badly to believe him completely. Some small, cautious part of her, the part that had watched him flinch at every gentle question about her grandmother, the part that had noticed how careful he still chose his words, even in the depths of tenderness that seemed otherwise unguarded, understood that his promise came with a shape she couldn't yet see the edges of. She let herself believe it anyway. It was easier, and she was tired of being the only careful person in the house. It was 3 days later that the letter arrived, not addressed to Mara, but to Elias, forwarded from an attorney's office 2 counties over, the kind of official correspondence that made his face go pale the moment he saw the return address. What is it? Mara asked, watching him read it standing in the kitchen doorway. His hand tightened on the paper until it crumpled at the edges. Nothing, he said, too quickly, folding it before she could see more than a few words. A state business. Nothing that concerns you. Elias. She'd learned over the past 3 days to recognize the particular stillness that came over him right before he lied to protect her from something. What did that letter say? It said, he began, and then stopped, and something in his jaw hardened into a decision she could see him making in real time. The decision to keep rationing the truth a little longer, even now, even after everything the study floor had broken open between them. It said the estate attorney needs to speak with both of us together as soon as possible. About what? About the will, he said quietly. About a provision your grandmother's original lawyer somehow overlooked when he first read it to your family. Mara felt something cold settle low in her stomach. Not suspicion of him, not anymore, but a dawning, dreadful certainty that whatever this provision was, it was the thing he'd been rationing all along. The truth he'd promised her only when she was braver. Is this it? She asked very quietly. Is this the thing that you haven't told me? Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen since the first night. Not guardedness, not grief, but something closer to dread. Not all of it, he said finally, but it's the part that starts to explain the rest. Mara, whatever you're going to hear in that lawyer's office, I need you to remember what happened 3 nights ago on that study floor was real. Whatever else you learn about me, about her, about why any of this was hidden the way it was, that part was never a lie. You're frightening me. I know, he said, and for the first time his composure broke entirely. His voice was raw with something that sounded almost like grief for a loss that hadn't happened yet. I'm frightening myself. I have been for 11 years. I just didn't expect to still be standing here when it finally caught up with me. He wouldn't say anything more that night, no matter how she pressed him, and Mara went to bed with the crumpled letter's contents unknown and a new, sharper fear taking root beneath the fragile thing that had grown between them on the study floor. The fear that whatever waited for them in that lawyer's office might be large enough to undo everything they'd only just allowed themselves to begin. Outside, the wind off the point had gone still and quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a second storm. And Mara lay awake, listening to it, wondering how much longer the house could hold both its ghosts and the two people still living among them. She thought, in the last waking moments before sleep finally took her, of the photograph still sitting on the study desk where she'd left it. Her grandmother laughing in a garden that no longer bloomed the same way. Elias's arm loose and certain around her waist. Two people who had found something worth hiding for 11 years. Mara understood, lying there in the dark with his absence beside her already an ache, that she was no longer entirely sure whether she was afraid of becoming a third name added to that hidden history, or afraid of not being given the chance.